G'day guys, my name's Hayden. I am an emergency doctor and I help people learn how to have difficult conversations. In the last video, we went through 3 tips on how to get off to a good start in any difficult conversation. In this video, I want to go through 3 tips that will help us move effectively through the body of the conversation and finish the conversation with the outcome that we want. All right, let's get into it. So the first tip is to gather information before you give information. Honestly, the most important thing here is just to shut up. Don't interrupt, let them speak. Show them with your body language that you're intent on understanding them. Listen. Obviously, when you're gathering information, you're gonna need to ask questions. But when you do ask questions, try to make them open questions rather than closed questions. Closed questions are questions that you can answer with either a yes or a no, and they can really shut the conversation down. They can turn it into something that looks and feels and sounds a bit like an interrogation. Open questions, on the other hand, are questions that encourage the other person to tell their story. The best way to start any open question is with the words what or how. What do you make of the situation, Gatsby? What do you see as the biggest barrier here? How does this situation compare with what you were expecting? How does this affect your goals? In my experience, if you are able to hold this intention of open, calm, compassionate curiosity, and if you're courageous enough to really explore the perspective and the understanding and the expectations and the concerns of this other person, you are going to find out things that you had no idea about before. And these things could completely change your framing of the situation, of the problem, and of the potential solutions available to you. The second big tip I have for you is to aim to establish a sufficiently shared understanding. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, so let's take a moment to unpack that. When we go into a difficult conversation, it's really common for us to have a particular thing we want to achieve, a particular goal, a particular agenda. And the way that we often frame difficult conversations is in terms of a sort of win-lose criteria. If I get what I want, I've won. If I don't get what I want, I lose. And the problem with that is that it can turn any difficult conversation into a kind of zero-sum game. In giving you this principle, the principle of aiming to establish a sufficiently shared understanding, what I'm trying to do is displace this agenda of yours, this goal that you have to win at all costs, and to replace it with the goal of establishing understanding, with the goal of making sure that you really understand the other person and that they really understand you. Let's not forget that. It's important that the understanding is shared. It's not just one way. It's not just about you appeasing them. It's about arriving at a shared understanding. Now, it's not just a shared understanding, it's a sufficiently shared understanding. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you don't have to agree on everything. There are going to be things about their worldview which are just not going to be compatible with your worldview. For example, you don't have to leave every difficult conversation agreeing on your religion. You don't have to leave every difficult conversation agreeing on political views. You don't have to leave every difficult conversation agreeing on every nuanced nook and cranny of your worldview. But what you do need to establish is a sufficiently shared understanding of the most important points with regards to the problem that you're trying to solve and the resources that you have available to solve it. One of the most useful skills for helping you establish a shared understanding is the skill of summarising back. The way I like to think about this is steel manning. And steel manning is a bit of a play on words. It's the opposite of straw manning. Straw manning is when you set up someone else's argument in such a way that it could be blown over with a puff of wind. It's kind of a sneaky, inauthentic way of pretending to empathise with someone. But when you steel man their argument, if you can summarise back someone's perspective with sufficient conviction and sufficient understanding of what their position really is, and you include not only the details of the situation, but the details of the impact on them and their emotional response to it. They are going to readily give you their trust. So Gatsby, I just want to summarize back to you what I've heard, just to make sure that I understand. Sounds like this morning when the sprinklers came on, you had this sudden urge, and given that there was no access to the lawn, you really felt like you had no other choice. That must have been incredibly hard. And then, at that point, it is all the more likely that they'll be ready to hear what you have to say. Look, thanks for sharing that stuff with me, Gatsby. Is it okay if I share some of my thoughts now? I guess the thing that I'm worried about is the possibility of stepping in one of these things. You know, when it gets in between your toes, it squeezes up, and I think you're probably getting the picture. The third principle or tip I want to share with you today is to always agree on a plan. Never finish a difficult conversation without agreeing on a plan. Once I'm satisfied that we have established a sufficiently shared understanding, what I'll often do to establish a plan is ask the other person, so what do you think is the best way forward, Gatsby? The beauty of this kind of open question is it firstly makes them think, it makes them problem solve, it makes them put the pieces of the problem together and the pieces of the solution, and it makes them commit because they're the one who have come up with the plan. If the other person comes up with the plan, they are much more likely to go through with it than if it's something that you give to them. Now, this isn't always the case, and sometimes you're going to have to give them the plan. This is much more likely, for example, if you're in a difficult conversation where you've just had to break some bad news to someone. You can't really expect the other person to come up with the plan if you've just told them some horrible thing that's happened. Whatever the case, the key components of the plan have to be some concrete action about what happens next, a specific time in which to catch up and review progress, or, just review how things are going. And thirdly, you need to make sure that you make an offer of support, such that if they need help at any time, that you're available to help them out. So that's it, guys. There are 3 tips there to help you move through the middle and the back end of a difficult conversation. Just to summarize, the 3 tips we covered were to gather information before you give information, aim to arrive at a sufficiently shared understanding, and always agree on a plan. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you haven't had a chance to have a look at the previous video on 3 tips to help get you started in any difficult conversation, I highly recommend you check that out. There'll be a link in the description below. In the meantime, if you've got any requests, questions, comments, or anything specific that you'd like covered in future videos, put them in the comments section below. I'll endeavor to address all those things in future videos. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you soon.